Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of In Your Phase Shorts, where I, Jeremy Visser, will cover a bunch of information about specific armies and how their changes are in 3.0 for this season. And today we're going to cover Sylvaneth. Sylvaneth had quite a few changes from basically 2.0 release book to Kragnos to 3.0, mostly in the shape of the Wildwoods changing. But the biggest change in the entire transition was the introduction of the Warsong Revenant. The Warsong Revenant was probably an overdue character for that book. It finally gave the army a kind of a caster heavy character who's also pretty okay at combat, with a really nifty War Scroll spell. And in the spirit of the show, which is about explaining some things you gotta watch out for these armies, you really have to watch out for the Revenant. The Warsong Revenant's War Scroll spell is basically a mini old 2.0 Croak spell where he does an exploding mortal wound trigger based on the cast value of the spell, and it's on unmodified cast value. Meaning, it's on modified cast value, meaning that if you roll a 14, a 15, 16, or 12 or whatever, and the reason I said 14, 15, 16 is because it's going to become apparent to you that he can roll that high for a spell. You would roll that many dice for every unit within 9 inches, and on a 5-up they would take a mortal wound. So kind of cool, exploding mortal wound based on cast values. And the reason I say they can go up to that high of cast values is that they Sylvaneth have access to a lore spell called the Throne of Vines. And Throne of Vines is effectively a +2 to cast as long as the user has not moved or been set up going forward. And it's stackable. You can cast it every battle round and effectively get +2, +4, +6, +8 as time goes on. As long as that model does not move, it gets or set up, meaning that if you pile in, you do a normal move, retreat, whatever, you will lose that. But if you stand still, it keeps stacking. So when you combine that with some of the other mechanics that Sylvaneth has, like Gnaw Root, which has really powerful tools for casters, Spell Portal, Cogs, those are all like tools accessible to Sylvaneth. He just starts basically being kind of like the Sylvaneth version of an artillery unit, because he'll just take a spell through a Spell Portal, and the way Spell Portal gets deployed, it doesn't even have to be him casting it. It can be like Dryka was in the middle of the table, summoning the Spell Portal backwards to him, and then summoning the second one forward to the enemy target that you want to nuke. And since they only have to be both within 18 of Dryka, not that the first one has to be within 1 inch of her, you can really cover some bloody range of that. And as he blows his horn through the damn Spell Portal, he will just hit something across the other one, or many things across the other one, very hard. And it really penalizes armies that don't have any magic defense, or the fact that armies that want to castle up and bundle up, like it just really, really takes a toll on them very quickly. Now, it's a very powerful combo, but it is a combo, so it is unfortunately, like, in a sense, can be broken apart by through many ways, like stopping the spell, and so forth and so forth. But there are ways for the Sylvaneth player to be so good at casting through Gnaw Root and some of their relics. You can kind of finagle your way away from basically getting punished too bad for not having the combo, having people having counters to the combo. One of the examples is the fact that I personally wouldn't stack all of the mechanics. I would keep the Revenant moving, because he gets a basically native +3 to cast as long as he casts Throne of Vines first, and he has +1 to cast if he's 9 inches away from a Sylvaneth Wildwood. So +3 is usually good enough, and it doesn't keep you static too much, and you can kind of, you don't necessarily be like the biggest artillery bomb ever, but you need to be relevant enough to snipe out small characters or grouped units to finish off things, and let the rest of the army pick it off. So anyway, that's the thing. That's a mechanic you got to watch out for, folks. One of the other thing is you got to watch out for and change in 3.0 is how Dryka works now for heroic actions. So Dryka basically is a monster, which is important. She's a wizard, which is also important. She's incredibly good at sniping at heroes because she just triggers mortal wounds on 6 hit with her 20 or 10 to 20 attack shots, depending on how she feels that turn. And with the combination of command points +1 to hit, the finest hour +1 save +1 wound for that turn, she can really dish out like the snipe into enemy units. Like it should be re-rolling one. She'll be plus hitting winning on like twos, hitting on threes, I believe, or in the range. She's just you gotta watch out for her because she will ruin your day. And the fact that she's a monster makes it even more obnoxious because she can actually get bonus points very easily. She's somewhat fast. She's no slouch in combat. She's not great, but she's no slouch either. And though she only has 10 wounds and she doesn't really have defenses against mortal wounds, she, with all the healing that's available in the book, especially through Nalroot and heroic action, it can be very frustratingly hard to kill these like heroes effectively. One of the other big changes overall to the army is the fact of their plus save mechanics. So Sylvaneth are in this really interesting position in the game now because a lot of people are kind of taking these big toys, these big monsters, these higher end characteristic combat units, but not necessarily mortal wound generating units. And so they're in this weird, unique spot where like they have all of the perfect defenses against like this type of mechanics. We'll talk about the Kurnoff Hunters, who lost their reroll saves but got +1 save if they anchor down. They also have Spite Swarm, the spell that basically triggers at the end of every hero phase now, and you get to pick a mode. Either it's +3 movement, +3 charge, or +1 save. And since it triggers at the end of every hero phase, you're like, on my turn I get +3. I want +3 movement, +3 charge. On my opponent's turn I want +1 save. And it's you roll for every unit within a whole even 8 inches, I believe, at the end of the spell. And on a 2-up, that spell basically gives them that bonus. So not only are you +1 save for a lot of things, then you can take a Tree Lord Ancient for a command ability, give another +1 save as an aura. And if you have Kurnoff Hunters on the table, it's another aura that gets generated through them as well. So all of a sudden you're noticing very quickly, like, holy shit, Sylvaneth are like walking around with like +2 to +3 saves very fast. And not counting their tree cover, like they can, if they're stacking in the trees and so forth. So they can be incredibly annoying for certain armies to deal with because of just their amazing defensives against like high ran characteristic. The one thing you have to probably finish watching out for when Sylvaneth is how they deploy their trees. So one of the biggest change that Games Workshop did from Kragnos to the 3.0 is how they rewrote the tree placement. So one of the things that they did was that now you have a choice of effectively either placing one tree down, and unfortunately for folks who have the older trees, those are no longer legal. You can only use the new trees. But you can if you place them all together, touching tips, I know, come on, Games Workshop, they become one terrain feature. And they also gain the silver wood, so whatever the tree rule from the core rules, as well as on top of their regular rules that they get from their war scroll, which means that they do block landslide 3 inches deep unless you have 10 woods and so forth. But where it gets interesting is if you want to not place them as one terrain feature, you can choose to place 3 individual trees away from each other as a minimum of at least 3 inches away. And all you have to do at that point is follow the range restrictions of summoning those trees. So you could put like one tree within 18 inches of the caster using the summoning Wildwood spell, another tree somewhere else within 18 inches of that caster, and all of a sudden very quickly you've started creating these kind of roadblocks during like small lanes of avenues, especially for armies that do not have the fly keyword. You've also created very fast a bunch of summoning or teleportation points for the rest of your army. That is probably my favorite change for Sylvaneth so far, is the fact that they used to be kind of slow in utilizing their teleportation triggers and giving themselves plenty of opportunities for the second half of the game to teleport where they need to be depending on the flow of the battle. But now with this change, they've become amazingly good very quickly at maximizing that. Now, unfortunately, the limitations for Sylvaneth is that you're still restricted to only one movement phase teleport outside of very specific models like Dirthrue or the Tree Lords, and you can still keep them in the roots of the forest, so you can still summon them as reserve during the game. But it does give you the ability to just really quickly take different vantage points that you want to use in the later half of the game. The one last thing you're probably gonna want to worry about when you're playing Sylvaneth, and this is something that is probably least on my radar in terms of like if you'll see it or not, is the Ever Queen. Alariel did change a little bit in 3.0, but she is fundamentally still too expensive, not good enough of a wizard, and she just the synergy she does provide the army is pretty huge for her command ability, but she just unfortunately is like one of these god models that is too expensive, not enough resilience because every defensive mechanic she is based around the high save modifiers plus save modifiers and the fact that she heals. Not necessarily that she is as a defensive mechanic that is more front heavy, which is based on like how much damage your opponent does, right? Like Morathi, which ignores pass 3, or Gotrek, which has reduces to 1 and then has 3 up shrug, of Archeon, which effectively just you know has a 1 up save most of the time. Not that you can't take a Lariel to a 1 up save, but she just doesn't have the same board presence, as Archeon. Or Nagash, which is effectively just as a 6 up shrug with a 1 up save and reroll 1s of save. Like things like that. Like she's not bad by any stretch of the mind, but she doesn't necessarily feel very tanky, and she doesn't feel very offensive, and she's not very necessarily good wizard, like in all the respect of comparison to the equivalent models. So you do have to watch out for her. She does, like, her summoning triggers can swing a game. I joke that she doesn't hit as hard. The beetle can be very scary for some like armies. And finally, the fact that she makes Kurnoth hunters terrifying. One of the other like big change in 3.0 that you'll maybe see a little bit more than the Ever Queen is bow hunters. Now that they introduce all out attack. All out attack on bow hunters is great. Now you have your the biggest complaint every Sylvaneth player has ever had about bow hunters is that they hit on 4s, and the sergeant hit on 3s. Well, now you can make the entire unit hit on 3s with a command point, which is pretty cool and it's pretty powerful. But the situation is they're just not providing enough board presence typically in the game. They're still only Ren 1, which is a huge, like, it's not a great, like, Ren 1 is almost, it might as well be Ren 0 in a lot of cases, the way the game is being played right now. Because they're just, most people are easily can find, especially on their heroes, they can find easily +2 save very quickly. And so they're not in a good spot in terms of actually being a damage dealer, but they did get a slight buff, right? You can definitely make them more powerful in certain war groves, such as Heartwood, I believe, which is has a relic where you can get rerolls to hit to them with attack. So you're almost guaranteeing like you're gonna hit every time. Well, a lot. But the problem is that like it's against any hero that gets +2 save and has a 3 up save at least, you're just not really gonna do much to them. It's almost, the Scythe Hunters just become so much more relevant because of the -2 Ren in the meta, not because they're just board presence, have more board presence. They also are not punished as much for squad coherency rules, right? Now that Kurnoth Hunters, on the topic of Kurnoth Hunters, now that they're all basically 5 wounds, it means they count as 2 models, which is why a unit of 6 Kurnoth Hunters of Scythes is very interesting for board presence, because they're 12 models, because they can swing up top of each other, because they're 2-inch reach and their bases are slightly smaller than 2 inches, and the fact that the Ren 2, the only downside of Scythe Hunters is that they have D3 damage, which can be like the most swingy mechanic, as anybody will tell you. You can sometimes roll like to the heavens, or sometimes roll down to the dirt, like. It's just too swingy to depend on them. Personally, I would probably take a mixture of both sword hunters and scythe hunters. I do like 6 scythe hunters with 6 2 units with 3 sword hunters. I do like the appeal of having multiple vectors of attacks with hunters, but it becomes very hard to start squeezing everything in the army, because it does really feel sometimes you have to have cogs, you have to have Spite Swarm, you have to have a Spellmare, you have to have a Warsong Revenant, you have to have a tree lord ancient. Like and you have to have dry. Like you see, like you all of a sudden, like your list is almost written for you before you even have to get. If you want to build a competitive list, and then like your options left are like, well, you got maybe 200 to 300 points you can play with. So, you know, hot take, Sylvaneth is very good in 3.0. All they're missing is basically a unit that's a halfway point between a Kurnoff Hunter and a Tree Revenant. Like that's all they're literally missing is that like one unit that can maybe like a Kurnoffy like Cav unit, and I think the book is in just absolutely great shape for 3.0. And for last words of a competitive player about this army, it's just anybody who plays Sylvaneth usually has the most beautiful army at an event. They're just such gorgeous models. You never, even though people think I'm just mostly a competitive player, I've rarely ever seen a Sylvaneth army and didn't look at it across the table and I was like, damn, that is a beautiful army. So all your Sylvaneth players should be very damn excited about this edition. Your army does function much better in this edition than it did previous edition. You're very good at battle tactics. You have access to all the tools. You can participate in all the phases. Like it's just a phenomenally good, solid army for 3.0. All right, with that in note, that was my first ever recording of my In Your Phase shorts for changes to 3.0 for season 1, and I look forward to you guys' comment and feedback, and as the internet always trolls, smash that subscribe button, or at least Alex always says that. But I think just if you thought about we're on the fence about playing Sylvaneth, you should really heavily consider it, and come join us in the wonderful world that is competitive AoS. Have a good day, folks.